Welcome to those of you who are joining. We'll wait a minute or so just to allow people to join, and then we'll get started at 6:30. People to join. Welcome, everybody. We'll get started shortly. We'll start at 6:30. Participants are still joining, so we'll give them a couple minutes, couple seconds to join. Everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Amber Bennett, and my normal job is as the Executive Director of Reclimate, but I will be joining you as the host. Mostly, I'll make sure that we're moving through the agenda, and I'll be introducing folks and keeping us on track. So thanks, everyone. And I can see that some people have already started. If you want to introduce yourself and introduce where you're joining us from in the chat, I encourage you to do that. And while we're looking, for those of you who are familiar with Zoom, pretty standard. We'll be using the chat to share links and to introduce yourself. I encourage you to do that. You'll see that on the bottom toolbar of the screen, and we will not be using that for questions. So questions will be monitored and answered using the Q&A function. You will also find that on the bottom of your toolbar or bottom of the screen. So once again, we'll be using the chat to share information. We encourage you to introduce yourself. And then we'll be using the Q&A function to ask questions when we get to that part of the program. Otherwise, I would share that we will be recording today's session. So for those of you who may have members or people who you would like to share this with, there will be a recording made available afterwards. And I suspect if there's any slide decks or materials shared, those will also be shared following the webinar. So thank you again. Please introduce yourselves in the chat if you like. Oh, it looks like the chat is disabled. Okay, so don't introduce yourself in the chat. Please use the Q&A though for questions when we get to that point. So in terms of today's agenda.
I'm sorry, Amber, I'm sorry to interrupt. The chat is now enabled.
Well, thank you. Okay, so it's always really nice to see who's joined from where. And so it's really fun just to see kind of different people from all across the country. So please use the chat if you can to introduce yourself. Let us know where you're joining us from. And thank you to whoever in the background who made that happen. So in terms of today and our agenda, we will start with a land acknowledgement, and then we have a variety of speakers. I'm really excited to say that we'll be joined by Dr. Mili Roy, Marc Lee. I will introduce them more formally when we get to that point. We'll have some time for questions and answers following the panel discussion on health affordability in the climate crisis. We'll have a discussion led by some of the organizers with Seniors for Climate Action on April 26th plans. We have a trailer of Later is Too Late, which is really exciting. Then we'll have a moment for some wrap-up comments. any remaining questions. And then for those of you who are interested, we've begun a little tradition of having a after chat for the meeting. So if people have interest in digging into more conversation, then we provide a separate link to a new meeting. And then we move over there and we have a moment for some conversation. So with that in mind, I would like to hand it over to Anne, Paul, who will lead us through the land acknowledgement.
Okay, so I see the image, but I don't see me. I think it's better if people can actually see me, Eric, when I speak, not the slide. Anyway, this is your reconciliation address. I'm going to quote Kevin Gover, a Pawnee Nation citizen. He's in charge of museums and culture at the Smithsonian Institute, unless Trump or Ilana have removed him. He says, when a land acknowledgement becomes routine, or worse yet, is strictly performative, it goes in one ear and out the other. When I hear a land acknowledgement, he says, part of what I'm hearing is, there used to be Indians here, now they're gone. Isn't it a shame? Based on my 35 years of Indigenous solidarity work, I reckon Gover's view is shared by all my Indigenous allies. I assume everyone in this inspiring network knows you live on territory stolen from one or more of the 55 distinct Indigenous peoples original to the nation we call Canada. I hope you are informed on the genocidal history pertinent to your area. Indigenous peoples are on the front line of climate collapse and chaos, as well as climate survival and resistance. The short video you're about to see should encourage you to directly engage in climate action with nearby Indigenous land and water protectors. If you need help, my email will be in the chat to figure out how to engage. By the way, if you find it quiet, turn your volume up on your device.
There are things happening on the land that are very disturbing.
Some of our lakes have become unswimmable. Some of our well water has become undrinkable.
Elders can't predict a lot of the weather patterns or what is known in our traditional ecological knowledge.
It's affecting the maple. It affects the trees. Some of the birds are not even flying south anymore.
The medicines that we used to be able to find, we can't find them anymore.
We know that the animals are going to suffer. And if the animals suffer and the land suffers, we're going to suffer.
Communities are slipping into the ocean in the Arctic, or their houses are literally sinking into the permafrost. And it feels like the only people that are being like, whoa, 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 what are you doing? Have been Indigenous communities calling for an end to these things. Transition needs to happen now. We need to stop doing what we've been doing and begin something new. That's where this idea of Indigenous climate action has really come from. This idea that Indigenous peoples aren't just the first to be impacted, but can be the first people to provide solutions that are grounded in more than just economic solutions.
Canada and its whole system, its whole economic paradigm is fundamentally out of sync with what real tangible action on climate looks like.
What I see from grassroots movements like ICA, Idle No More, they're putting together plans that are ambitious and something that actually reflects the type of knowledges that we're talking about all the time when we talk about Indigenous knowledge.
We are our own experts. We don't have to translate ourselves all the time through the lens of the mainstream.
We want to work towards a recognition of our fundamental role as the leaders in this discussion.
Because we can't just be addressing climate from a science perspective. We have to be addressing it from a human rights perspective and an Indigenous rights perspective. Indigenous climate actions and other Indigenous-led initiatives and mobilizations are going to be critical to making that happen in the most effective way.
And that is a beautiful video. I'm hoping that it's also something that we can go back to and take a look at. There's definitely different parts of it that I found quite powerful. So thank you for sharing that. That's the first time I've seen it. Okay, so I'm now going to hand it over to Nick, who is one of the sponsors and coordinating committee member with Seniors for Climate Action Now. And Nick is going to talk a little bit about the themes and the focus for April 2025 and why the focus on Earth Day. So over to you, Nick.
Thanks very much, Amber. So that's my job, is to introduce the theme for our events on Earth Day. And our theme is built on the international theme, which is our power, our planet. And last December, when we decided to mobilize for Earth Day, we went with that theme, our power and our planet. But that was before the Trump offensive, the offensive on climate, on the poor and underprivileged, working class people in the United States, the offensive on Canada, and various countries around the world. Since those significant tectonic effect events, we've added a third element, our country, to the theme. So now the theme is our power, our country, our planet. We return to the concept of our country aspect later in this session. But for now, I'm going to address the global Earth Day theme, our power, our planet, why we chose Earth Day, and how we see our mobilization. First, a quick overview. Seniors for Climate. Seniors for Climate is a movement of seniors who are deeply alarmed at climate breakdown. We're in a climate emergency. We need to act now, and later is too late. We must phase out the use of fossil fuels. Climate change is affecting our health. Extreme heat, wildfires, floods, storm, droughts, and more. And it's going to get a lot worse. Action on climate must be intergenerational, intersectional, joining with youth, First Nations, the disadvantaged, and equity-seeking populations. We're all in this together. And we believe we need to speed up the transition to renewable power and clean energy. We have to stop our government, banks, and pension plans from aggravating the climate crisis. So last year, when we set out to organize seniors across the land to show that seniors care and that a demographic which makes up close to a quarter of the Canadian population is supportive of the climate movement, we wanted to bring them into the climate movement. Between early May and October 1st of last year, seniors across the country responded to the call. We went from 20 people in May to organized events in 76 locations across the country on October 1st, about between 6,000 and 7,000 people mobilized. But we saw it as a beginning. We know that it will take a lot more than that to win the day, to really turn things around. We immediately set about determining what our next action was going to be. Clearly, we were going to organize around the beginning of October in 2020, around the 1st of October in 20 and 25. But we also wanted to bridge the gap from one year to the next with actions that would keep the momentum. And so we settled on the Earth Day focus. The first Earth Day was called April 22nd, 1970. And maybe I can get a little picture of that, Eric. It brought together those who had taken up the environmental cause as a result of the increased environmental awareness in the late 60s with the massive numbers and energy of student-led anti-war movement people. The first Earth Day brought about 20 million people out into the streets across the United States. And that event had an effect. It led to a series of environmental legislation initiatives in the U.S. with law in the 1970s, including the Clean Air Act and the Endangered Species Act. The first Earth Day proved that, first, that people cared, and two, that numbers counted. And we need those numbers again, and we need a worldwide movement. We are focusing on Earth Day this spring, but that we hope that will lead into an intensive fall mobilization. And if all goes well, it will coincide with global actions, certainly in the United States, where Third Act is organizing September 20th and 21st, what they're calling Sundays, will be actions across the United States. And the attempt is to build similar actions around the world. So we'll be looking at joining that, and that's where we're going, is to have a global mobilization in the fall. So the theme for Earth Day is Our Power, Our Planet, inviting everyone around the globe to unite behind renewable energy and to triple the global generation of clean energy by 2030. Earth Day is indeed about changing the power we use, but it's also about people power. If a change is going to happen, it's up to us, seniors united with all others who recognize the dangers we face, who care about future generations, and refuse to sit back while the climate deteriorates. And we can do it because we have the numbers and we have the motivation. Our very future is at stake. It is our power. It is our planet. Following the October 1st mobilization, we, along with many, many others in the environment movement and climate movement, recognize that we need to make the connection. No solution to climate crisis without reestablishing harmony with nature. There can be no harmony with nature, with respect for life and all life, including human life, if there is no solution to the social crisis that we're facing. Nor will we be able to build support from the general population unless they see in our movement the solutions to their problems. Today, you will hear in the next speakers about the climate crisis and human health, and about food security, housing, energy, and transportation, and those links. Later on, we'll come back to the theme in our country. Thank you. Over to Amber.
So we are really fortunate to be joined by two stellar speakers, and on a topic that couldn't be more important right now, related to climate and affordability and action. And so our first speaker is Marc Lee. He is a senior economist at the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives and a leading progressive voice on economic and social policy. His research covers climate and energy policy, affordable housing, and economic trends. He holds an MA in economics from Simon Fraser University and a BA from Western University. He's a past Progressive Economics Forum chair, and he now teaches macroeconomics for policy analysis at Simon Fraser University's School for Public Policy. He will be joined by Mili Roy, who is a physician, a surgeon, a researcher, and educator, serving as the assistant professor at U of T, or University of Toronto's Faculty of Medicine, and a board member of the Canadian Journal of Ophthalmology. She co-chairs CAPE, which is the Canadian Association of Physicians for Environment, the Ontario chapter, and the Ontario Climate Emergency Campaign. She is a climate reality leader, and she completed the Harvard Medicine Climate Health Fellowship and attended COP29. She is passionate about climate and health, and engages in education, media, advocacy, and policy work, believing democracy is key to climate action. So I think that we are in for a very interesting conversation, and I will pass it over to Marc to kick us off. Thank you, Marc.
Thank you so much for having me here. Can you hear me okay? All good? All right, I'm going to jump to some slides, and I'll try to be as quick as possible because I know time is of the essence.
Minutes, Marc.
All right, so thanks everyone. So yeah, I'm with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, based in Vancouver, and for many years I led up our climate justice project, looking at the intersections between getting serious on climate change and addressing some of the core justice issues in terms of people who have low incomes or who are renters, seniors. There's a whole bunch of different ways that you can slice that. I guess I just wanted to start by talking about how climate change is already costing us. That for a long time, maybe 20 years ago, it was easy to think that climate change was something that was going to be happening well into the future, that would undermine the habitat of polar bears. maybe would raise the oceans a foot. It didn't seem like a really big deal, and it seemed like we had a lot of time to make the changes necessary. And I think that is no longer the case. So here I'm just showing a report that Ben Parfin and I published a few years ago, looking at the 3 extreme weather events that were climate fueled in British Columbia in 2021. In June, we had a heat dome that lasted 4 days in the southern part of British Columbia and led to over 600 deaths and caused major issues across the province. That was followed by several months of wildfires, which afflicted the province. And of course, they've become more of a regular thing, not just here in British Columbia, but across Canada in recent years. That just simply never happened before. And then in the fall, we had a major flooding and landslide event where we had 11 atmospheric rivers hit the province in the course of a month. And adding on top of all of the parched soils from the wildfires and drought caused immense damages. So Ben and my report looked more specifically at the different types of economic costs. Oftentimes when you hear the media report on this, they're always talking about insured damages, the damages that would be covered by insurance companies for people who have insurance. But of course, a lot of people don't have insurance. And even when you do have insurance, that coverage can be extremely limited. So we wanted to look at the whole suite of costs that are costing, in this case, British Columbians right now. So the various damages to assets and property, but also lost income for workers. When some of these events hit, people can't get to work. Or their work is closed for some reason due to various linkages. We have all of the costs we are paying through the public sector in terms of cleanup and disaster response, and also the longer term needs to rebuild cities and infrastructure, and we are really well behind on that. And then of course there are very specific implications of all of this for vulnerable populations. We tallied this all up to be about between 10.6 and $17 billion across the 3 events. We did sort of a range of scenarios to get a high and low estimate. And the atmospheric river flooding and landslides were the biggest portion of that, posing really huge costs to the province. Shifting right away to the more recent inflation event, what I'm showing here is I wanted to just illustrate some differences around affordability, because we just went through this big inflation episode, largely in 2022 and 2023. And what we found here in British Columbia, where we have a public crown corporation, BC Hydro, producing largely clean, renewable electricity, somewhat controversial because it's big hydroelectric dams that were built in the 60s and 70s, had major impacts on lots of people, including First Nations around the province, but nonetheless provide this stable base of power that is in the yellow, which there's barely any impact whatsoever. And in fact, BC Hydro was used by the provincial government to provide some affordability checks back to British Columbians. In contrast, fossil fuels were the area where they were really driven by what was really behind inflation. In particular, Russia's invasion of Ukraine spiked energy prices. So you see that in the green and in terms of gasoline prices, and in the blue in terms of natural gas prices. The gas ones are a bit smooth because they go through a rate setting process with the BC Utilities Commission. But as you can see, gas prices are very volatile. So if you're dependent on driving a car or dependent on using heating oil or natural gas to heat your home in the winter, you're particularly vulnerable because of fossil fuels. And so I think arguably we can make the case that shifting to renewables is not just better for the planet, but it's better for stability of prices and affordability over the long run. We produced another report a couple years ago in partnership with the Climate Action Network, looking at what are the public solutions that we could put on the table to get to our Paris targets. And so I won't read them all to you, but we covered a number of really key areas of public spending across the whole economy, each of which, and if you go into detail in the report beyond what I can speak about here, address a number of aspects of affordability. So we all know we want to build out our electricity systems with clean electricity and connect those east-west. I think that has also given renewed impetus with what we are seeing with the tariff threat and Donald Trump and the desire for more homebred Canadian economic development. Retrofitting our homes and buildings is a particularly important one. We are recommending in this report that the 100% of the upfront cost be covered by the federal government, and that only 50% of that cost would need to be repaid. And there's a number of other ideas around policy. Groups like Efficiency Canada have developed specifically addressing the needs of low-income households, most of whom tend to be renters and have a lot less agency over the decisions that affect their overall housing. In transportation, we argue that it's more than just shifting to electric vehicles. I mean, all vehicles need to be electric at some point, but we look more at structural solutions, the development of complete communities where people are less reliant on a car to begin with, where they can walk or bike to the places we need. When it comes to seniors, I think there's a lot of opportunities for seniors to age in place, developing seniors housing in closer proximity to healthcare, public services, and other amenities that people need, where they don't need a car to get around. And of course, public transit is a really key piece of our transportation strategy, not just within urban regions, but also in an intercity basis across the country. And we would expand, via rail again to be a backbone for transportation across the country. So we talk about food and other sort of jobs and other related programs in there, but I won't get into the details because I don't have much time. On the transit side, last year we put out a report in partnership with the BC Federation of Labor, developing a 10-year investment plan for public transit to build that out and make it something that people can rely on when they need it, to get to where they need to go, when they want to go, and be able to get back home again. There's a lot of aspects to transit. It's more than just saying that service is there. It's got to be something that people can depend on, and that's reliable and of high quality. So obviously in a city like Vancouver, there's a lot of ideas you can have for building out rapid transit, but even in rural areas, this was based on some work that was done in the interior of British Columbia, looking at how we can connect a lot of smaller centers with bus networks that are intercity and then connect into local transit systems at the same time. I'm part of an affordability action council, which is looking at the intersections between climate change policies and affordable. So we've done a few reports that I think folks might be interested in. One was looking at the costs of food, and the authors here were recommending essentially a groceries and essentials benefit, sort of like a fixed income transfer that would help folks with low incomes to ensure that they could meet everyday needs, and this would be linked to the overall costs of food for a safe and nutritious basket of food. And we looked at carbon pricing as well. Now, carbon pricing is kind of the program everyone loves to hate these days. As an economist, I still really like carbon pricing, and I think one of the things to think about in terms of affordability is that, yes, it's supposed to make it more expensive to combust fossil fuels, but we also take all of the revenues from that and flow that back to households. So if you're a low to moderate income household, you will generally get back more in that rebate than you pay in carbon tax, unless you're a really, really extensive user of carbon. And this particular study did some of the math looking at all of that and how it's played out for Canadians, and finds it's not a major contributor to the inflation that we've been seeing over the last couple of years. That's about it for me. I hope I kept on time. I'll pass it back to the host. Thank you.
You're on mute, Amber.
What an amateur. Sorry about that. I was just saying that for any of you who may have questions about Marc's presentation or for the presentation that Millie will be giving, please use the Q&A function. I noticed a couple of questions were put in the chat. So the Q&A is just on the bottom toolbar here, and we'll be monitoring those, and we'll be queuing those up for the question and answer period following the panel. So thank you, Marc, and over to you, Millie.
Great, thank you. Okay, can everybody hear me and see the slides? Great. Okay, well, thank you so much for the invitation to be here and for all of you who have come out. And I'll speak to you a little bit about climate change, health, and health economics, a set of intersecting crises, and maybe just start to touch on some solutions. And I'm going to jump right in. This entire talk is based on the notion that a ruined planet cannot sustain human lives in good health. So a healthy planet and healthy people are two sides of the same coin as we approach a point in history where we have reached the hottest period of recorded human history. So environmental health harms occur by two interconnected pathways when we burn fossil fuels. On the one hand, there is the carbon pollution pathway that leads to climate change. And on the other hand, the air pollution pathway that produces toxic particulate matter and gases, and all of these harm human health. Let's take a look at the carbon pollution pathway first. And here we understand that climate change is the single greatest threat to human health of our time, and that our very survival is at stake. This poster, modified from the Canadian Medical Association, tries to show the extent of climate change impacts all across our country. And let's have a closer look. First up, we have extreme heat. And we already heard mentioned the 2021 BC heat dome, which was the single greatest weather event or single largest amount of fatalities in Canadian history, with 619 deaths, many of whom were seniors. Global warming is also driving increasingly severe wildfires. We had Jasper, Los Angeles, and these create multiple health risks of their own and a spiraling escalation of carbon emissions. And in fact, worldwide, over 33,000 deaths per year are attributed to wildfire-related pollution, with up to a few thousand of those occurring right here in Canada every year. The climate crisis is also harming housing and food security, and both of these in turn are social determinants of health. If we are not housed and fed, we cannot be healthy. Furthermore, the medical community is deeply concerned that climate change may be set to aggravate over 60% of infectious human diseases while simultaneously increasing antibiotic resistance, which is a really deep problem. And finally, mental health impacts of climate change are absolutely devastating and disproportionately affect our youth, who have done the least to create the problem. This includes depression, addiction, suicide. A massive global study recently showed high levels of daily climate anxiety, hesitancy to have children, and that the majority of youth around the world feel that governments are betraying them and future generations. Now, not only our health is harmed by climate change, so are our healthcare systems. So have a look at the large picture on the left here, where a tornado has shredded a major pharmaceutical warehouse in the US. A single event like this can cause disruptions in critical medical supplies, drug supply chain, easily lasting upwards of a year, and these incidents are on the rise. At the top, you see the fireball of wildfire literally threatening the Yellowknife Regional Hospital. And in the bottom corner, you see the Army having to be involved in the evacuation that resulted. A patient died during the evacuation. And in the center of it all, so you see our healthcare professionals becoming stressed beyond capacity, burning out, leaving the profession. Now let's move to the next pathway of air pollution-related health harms. Today, about 99% of the world actually breathes polluted air, according to the latest WHO air quality guidelines. And this results in over 8 million people dying prematurely around the world every year, which translates to over 15,000 Canadians every year. How does this occur? Let's have a look at the impact of air pollution system by system on our health. Now, of course, when we breathe in the polluted air, the lung is the portal of entry, but it passes across the lung into the bloodstream and gains access to our entire body. So we see multi-system disease. So of course we expect lung disease. We see things such as asthma, chronic obstructive lung disease, but we also see serious heart diseases, heart attacks, irregular heartbeats, high blood pressure, brain diseases such as stroke, dementia, Parkinson's, diabetes and obesity. Air pollution is linked to several cancers, most strongly lung, leukemia, and breast. And it also causes serious harms to the most vulnerable amongst us, pregnant women and babies, with prematurity, birth defects, and even stillbirths. And independent of climate change, air pollution is also an independent risk factor, both for antibiotic resistance and for devastating mental health impacts, including depression and suicide, with the very highest levels of evidence, what we call meta-analysis level. Now, there are also equity concerns with air pollution. In Canada, lower socioeconomic status is linked to higher air pollution exposure and health risks, with greater barriers to healthcare access. And we see similar trends in racialized communities in the US literature. So with all of that in mind, let's take a look at the climate impacts on health economics. And I just wanted to start with a little bit of context, which I find very interesting, that only 100 active fossil fuel producers are linked to 71% of all global industrial greenhouse gas emissions since 1988. That's the year that we coined the word or the phrase climate change, and over 50% of all greenhouse gases since the Industrial Revolution in the 1700s, which really seems quite mind-boggling. So corporations like Exxon, BP, Chevron, and so on. And to add insult to injury, in 2022, for example, the coal, oil, and gas sector worldwide received subsidies that tally 17.6 million Canadian dollars every minute of every day of the year. So with all that in mind and the harm that is caused by burning these fossil fuels, let's look at some modeling which suggests that climate-related impacts just in the Canadian healthcare system is going to cost hundreds of billions of dollars per year. And we're talking in the near future. So for example, heat-related deaths and productivity losses, 10 billion a year by mid-century. Wildfire-related impacts, already topping over $20 billion per year. And the effect of air pollution, even as far back as 2016, and we need newer stats, 114 billion taken out of our economy every year. Add to this now the new specter of a US trade war, and I'm calling that a trade war on Canadian healthcare here. We know that 40% of our imported medical devices currently come from the USA. Even besides that, with so-called made in Canada health products, these are often highly dependent on complex supply chains that involve the US. Our healthcare dollar purchasing power is going to be undermined, whether we're looking at procurement, production, and so on, both by tariffs and our already weaker Canadian dollar. So we are looking potentially at major disruptions to accessing vital equipment, drugs, supply chain disruptions, and more. So let's look at some conclusions and draw and possibly some solutions here. First of all is the fact that in addressing climate change by reducing emissions, no matter what sector we reduce it from, we are preventing the worsening of health conditions around the world, and this is recognized by the United Nations. So there are strong health economics rationales to cut greenhouse gases. First of all, to get away from the thought that it is expensive to cut greenhouse gases. The WHO published clear studies showing that every dollar we spend in cutting greenhouse gases comes back to us doubled as $2 in healthcare savings alone, and let alone savings from public infrastructure and so many other facets. And then, of course, is what is the cost of a human life? We know that meeting climate goals of the Paris Agreement would save 1 million lives per year by 2050, just based on air pollution calculations alone. And sadly, we breached those targets for the first time last year. So measuring these health and economic co-benefits of climate action really strengthen the rationale and can be used when we're lobbying for policy change. So let's look at some game changers. In 2020, for the first time in history, renewable energy became cheaper than fossil fuels. This is incredible. What the fossil fuel industry doesn't want us to know. And in just a few short years, by 2023, we're looking at renewable energy hitting, or renewable electricity hitting a global record high of 30% of the entire energy mix across the world. So this is actually incredible news for public health everywhere. A Canadian clean energy development, for example, could bring massive climate, health, and economic co-benefits while achieving energy independence from the USA. So the understanding of the connections between climate health and dollars is growing. Despite the fossil fuel industry actively promoting disinformation, the reality of climate impacts is becoming increasingly hard to hide. The majority of Canadians in polling data are concerned about climate, even when not well informed. And we know that health framing for climate action works. It motivates policymakers and the public, and it can help depoliticize the issues. Health is now a permanent and key issue formally embedded in the United Nations global climate negotiations. I was fortunate to be in person at COP29 and witness the signing of the Baku Agreement that enshrines this going forward. So to wrap up, a reminder from the Canadian Public Health Association that we are the last generation with the opportunity to make the changes to avoid catastrophic climate change, which we must treat like the public health emergency that it is, but that this is our moment of greatest opportunity. So an acknowledgement to Seniors for Climate, everybody here today, everyone doing this work, and I leave you to imagine the future we want. I thank you for being here, and a final quote from a hero of mine, that we cannot get through a single day without having an impact on the world around us, and what we do makes a difference, and we have to decide what kind of difference we want to make, and you're all making a difference by being here today. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Mili. Let's keep people working. I actually didn't know that 2020 was the year we passed renewables being cheaper than fossil fuels. I actually wrote down quite a few things that I'm going to put into some work that I'm doing right away. So thank you for that. I can see that we've got some questions in the Q&A. And so for those of you who have questions but haven't fielded them yet, please use the Q&A function. It's at the bottom of your screen there. And for now, I'm going to pass it over to Michael Barkley and Karen to walk us through the Q&A portion for the speakers. So Mili and Marc, you can turn on your audio, and I'll hand it over to Karen and Michael to take us through. Thank you.
Okay. Well,
Thanks,
let me start with Marc. There's a question from Rob about how does your selection of infrastructure improvements relate to project drawdowns proposed solutions, if you know about that. He believes this is quite important for various programs to support each other. Do you have any familiarity with project drawdowns infrastructure?
I do, and I have their book. It's excellent. I think more on the technical side and sort of collecting knowledge and applying it in that context. Our report with the Climate Action Network was largely focusing on trying to work with a lot of the work that civil society had been doing. So modeling that the David Suzuki Foundation had done around electricity, or Farmers for Climate Solutions had done around food, Efficiency Canada around retrofits. So we recognized that a lot of great work had been done already, and we were trying to sort of compile that into a major investment plan for the federal government to just really kick things up the next gear. That said, we're still waiting for that level of action to happen, and yeah, it's I think it's a current challenge right now, and in terms of keeping things front burner when we have Donald Trump shaking his fist at us every day from south of the border.
Mike, I've got three questions, all related to my favorite topic on carbon taxes, which are directed to Mark as well. They were basically, Mark, have you had the CPA looked at Mark Carney's rough ideas on alternate carbon pricing? Not sure how alternate it is, but have you looked at it at all? Or any comments on it? And I guess also there are a couple of other related, how could we do a better job of communicating the value of carbon pricing? And well, there was one other on carbon pricing as well. Oh, yes, given that it's politically unfeasible, what emission reduction policies are workable and efficient? So a number of them.
All of those.
All of
Well, I have looked at Mark Carney's ideas, and I think he's in a challenging position because Poilievre has had such momentum around challenging the carbon tax and fermenting anger against it. So Carney's basically proposing to eliminate the consumer part of the carbon tax and focus on industrial carbon pricing, and I think there's challenges in that because it's not obvious, what they would do around, all of the money that's flowing back to households. So for a lot of lower income households, they will be worse off if that whole carbon pricing regime is eliminated. I think Carney has good ideas around sort of tariffs that we would put on imported goods to essentially match the Canadian carbon price. So that's something that's been talked about a lot, particularly in the European Union. And I think this idea of carbon border adjustments could be brought forward more. The industrial carbon pricing one is trickier, and we have sort of a version of it here in BC as well as federally, where what they've done is they've created what are called output-based pricing systems, which is kind of a mouthy way of saying that they're exempting a large portion of the emissions from industry from the carbon tax on the grounds that we need to protect their competitiveness. And so here in BC, we just brought in our own made in BC industrial pricing system that essentially exempts 2/3 of the emissions from the oil and gas industry. So from the very industry that's causing the problem. And the emissions associated with the exported fuel, exported natural gas or oil or coal aren't even counted at all. Like that's just counted in the jurisdiction where the combustion happens. So these are just the process emissions within Canada associated with getting fossil fuels out of the ground and to market. And really exempting 2/3 of those emissions is kind of a giveaway. And then for the remaining third, they're able to use offsets for 50% of those. So I don't know if folks have been following the conversations around offsets. It's been going on for years and years. But I mean, basically, offsets almost everywhere they've been deployed in Canada, in Europe through the old Kyoto Protocol. The Clean Development Mechanism is what it's called. They've been found to be completely rife with fraud because there's no way of telling whether a particular project that is an offset project would have gone ahead anyways. Only the proponent of that project is looking to really knows what the underlying situation is, and everybody else is looking to just make a deal. And it's in their incentive to kind of have a low bar for these things going ahead. So, I mean, I appreciate the challenge that Mark Carney is facing. Really the only area that the federal Liberals have delivered on in a substantial way is carbon pricing. And I think as an economist, I take some responsibility for that because this is the one that everyone listened to The Economist and said, oh, we should do carbon pricing. It's the most efficient way to reduce our emissions. But no one really put that through a political lens. And now that we sort of increased carbon prices slowly, only now are they at a level that people are starting to notice them. At $80 per ton, that's about 18 cents per liter at the pump. That'll go up to 21 cents per liter at the pump as of April 1st. That's a significant tax, and that will make you think. So I think it is actually starting to have an impact, but it's basically getting kneecapped, right at the moment where it's starting to have an impact. In terms of alternatives, and sorry, I know I'm going on and on, but it was a really long question. There's a lot we could do with public investments, and that was the gist of the paper we were making. The federal government can solve a lot of these collective action problems with its spending power, and regulation is the other main way that we address emissions. And we, probably the most successful climate policy in the world and in Canada are regulations on coal-fired electrical power. This is the only policy that's actually led to reductions in emissions in the Maritimes, in the United Kingdom, and other parts of the world. So it's ultimately a combination of all of those things. But if carbon pricing is politically impossible, then you're looking at a mix of public investment and public regulation.
Thank you, Mark.
I have a couple in the chat for Mili. So maybe I'll do those first, Karen, and then back to you. During COVID, there was talk about building our own facilities to produce medicine and medical equipment. And one quick question, you might know the answer to this, is what happened to all of that? And then do you feel the federal government policies are recognizing the current realities that are kind of tied together here that we're currently facing from a federal perspective? So that's
Right, sure. Sure. Thank you for the questions. I'm not an expert on medical manufacturing. I can tell you that when it sort of became very public that it was putting Canada in a very poor position, for example, with not being independently producing COVID vaccinations, that it did spur on some manufacturing development. There were some new vaccinations being manufactured in Quebec, for example. But I really haven't followed, how much more has progressed beyond that. I can tell you that when it comes to manufacturing, as I tried to sort of briefly explain in the allotted time, that even when something is being made in Canada, we are not sort of procuring and supplying every single item that is involved in the supply chain. So at the end of the day, so much of what we use is really has a global connection. So of course it would still be helpful to be manufacturing in Canada, but it would still not eliminate the problem because of complex supply chain sort of interdependencies. In terms of the question, is the government sort of reflecting the reality? I think no government is of course, perfect. I think we need to look at, at where they have tried to do right by people. And as Mark just mentioned, I think carbon pricing is a big one where we saw a government actually taking advice from experts and trying to translate that into policy, which is really commendable. I think we saw a failure in communication and, a failure to actually get public support. And I think it really underlines the importance that no matter what is being done at a policy level, that piece is so important to have constant public education, public engagement in order to keep public support to allow these things to happen. I don't have all of the policy expertise that Mark does, on the economic side, but one thing I'd like to share with the group while we have everyone here is that I just got off a meeting earlier today where CAPE and a few other groups are hoping to actually start a little campaign in preparation for the election, the federal election, trying to rejuvenate some form of policy on carbon pricing, whether it's going to be make big polluters pay or just pollution pricing. And we're going to be sending letters to all the federal parties and leaders with a basic ask that these be reflected in election platforms. But also, we're going to be asking organizations across the country to sign on to a letter and to share with all of your network so that we are collecting, demonstrating the support of organizations for these types of policies to not be cut out of Canadian policy going forward, and to collate and demonstrate voter support for these. So I hope that we can, count on the support of all the organizations here as we advocate for this. And then once we've collected these names and signatures, to amplify through the media and feed it back to those federal parties as they run their election campaigns.
Great. Thanks, Millie. That's really helpful. We'll look forward to seeing that. Karen, one last question over to you.
Last question. Well, I wouldn't like to lose this. Jen Jessup asked, is there a curriculum that you would recommend for public schools? Is anybody at the panel or anyone else able to answer that? Billy, great.
Okay, well, Mark had his hand up too, but I put my hand up because CAPE actually just published a fantastic report. Everyone can find it online. It was co-written with 4 Hour Kids, and it is an in-depth look at the deliberate and sort of progressive infiltration of our school education system from the fossil fuel industry. So I encourage you all to look that up online. If I get a chance, I'll post a link to it. But it certainly demonstrates beyond a shadow of a doubt that our curricula are being influenced by design by the fossil fuel industry. And if nothing else, we need to neutralize that. And to get back to a balanced curriculum that really presents all of the facts correctly, at such an important point in the education of our kids.
Wonderful. Mark,
And
you want to add something, Mark?
We out of our climate justice project, we actually produced a whole bunch of curriculum materials. I worked with a public school teacher, high school teacher, to develop modules in 8 different areas. Some of it's a little bit dated now. It was released about 10 years ago, so some of the numbers would need to be updated, but I think a lot of the core ideas and exercises would still be relevant today. So let me dig out the URL and I'll throw it in the chat for everyone.
Great. Thank you very much, Mark. So I'll pass it back to you, Amber. There are a lot more questions, but we won't be able to get to them now because we want to really get on to April 26th and what's going to happen going forward.
Okay, well, thank you both to to Millie and to Mark, and for those of you who would be interested in your slides or your presentations, I think that there's an offer to circulate those after the webinar. Okay, so over to you, Nick, now to talk us through the plans for April 26th, and then we will follow from that with a trailer. So lots more to come. But over to you, Nick, now. And you are on mute, Nick. So we'll just get you to.
Yep. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, so we've heard a couple of excellent presentations that tell us not only what's wrong, but what can be done to solve the problems with what's wrong. And they give us some sense of what we can be doing, how we can reorganize ourselves as a society, where we can go, how we solve the problems. There is a future that we can have, a future that we want. But one of the problems is that now we also face the Trump factor. And so it was difficult before, it is more difficult now. Trump in particular, not only is he attacking, poor and working class people in the United States, not only is he trying to dominate and control Canada for our minerals and our resources, he's also, not only is he challenging the whole world in terms of American domination and his dictate as to who can do what and why, but he's also directly challenging climate action. He is doing everything possible to undermine any action in terms of solving the climate crisis we're facing. And that, of course, means that the future is not good. That scenario, that action he is taking is very significantly a problem. And so we're going to be going into an election period soon. And a lot of our political leaders, and by and large, most of them, while they are resisting U.S. bullying, They're proposing the solution is oil and gas expansion, building more highways, mining projects, all the things that in fact will, in the shape they're being given to us, intensify the climate problem. And so we have to address that. We have to think about how in both protecting our right to make our own future, we also have to determine what that future is going to be. So politicians aren't offering a future built around electrification. They aren't offering, and renewable energy. They don't talk about the conservation of energy by and large and harmonization with nature. They don't talk about Indigenous sovereignty. They don't talk about the kind of future we know we need and that we're going to have to organize for. We know the dangers of global heating and how it can be prevented. They don't talk about the social inequity or the rights of Indigenous people to decide their future. That's a problem because a future built around fossil fuel pipelines, extensive mining, and highways is no future at all. Because a future without social justice will simply not work. A future without Indigenous rights will not work. It's not our decision what our future will be. It's also the decision of Indigenous people who, despite centuries of conquest and exploitation, maintain their rights and their sovereign rights. The Canada we want must resolve these issues. So in the discussion, we've heard the link between the climate crisis, health, food security, energy, transportation, economic insecurity, and the future we want is also the issue of maintaining our independence as a country and being able to implement the policies we choose. And our movement now, probably in ways more directly than up until now in the last while, it has to be part of a broader movement that will grow, a movement for the Canada we want. And we have to start defining what that is. We can't simply be acting in defense against Trump's initiatives without defining a new path, a different path. And we've heard some of the limitations around the political alternatives we're being given. So our job, I think, and we have to, as we go forward and as we talk about the April Earth Day events, is to bring climate into that movement. That has to be a movement for a better future with a definition of the world we want, not with a definition of the world that is more of the same that we're being given already. And so we have to distinguish ourselves, and we actually have to, again, we have to look at, what is our ability to build such a powerful movement that we can stop what is extremely regressive measures from the country to the south, and the dangers that our world faces on every front going forward. So that's where I think we can put the context of our power, our country, our planet, and that's where the Earth Day events can become a focus for mobilizing people around climate, yes, around social justice, Indigenous rights, yes, around our future, and part of what other people are going to be organizing going forward. So we're hoping that as we build and we build momentum for Earth Day and then beyond that into the fall mobilization, that we can encourage people to participate in that. I'll be coming back a bit later to some of the activities we're going to be doing, but I'm going to now pass it on to David Smith, who's going to introduce some of the people who are active around the April events. David?
Thank you very much, Nick. As Nick said, I'm here to introduce two of the location organizers for Seniors for Climate and ask them to talk about their Earth Day events that they have planned so far. So Lydia Byro from Niagara-on-the-Lake is going to talk first. And so Lydia, please tell us about your event.
Okay, so, thank you, everybody. It's been a wonderful evening so far, and we're talking about very serious things. So Niagara-on-the-Lake is a small community of only 18,000 people, but within the Niagara region, there are probably over 50 different environment groups. Our Earth Day event will take place on Tuesday, the 22nd of April, And we have a lovely community center that can house the event. We'd like to start off, it's going to be an evening event. We'd like to start off by looking at Denmark's renewable energy pathway. It took them over 10 years to get to 81% of their electricity generation from renewable energy, and they are on track to be at 100% by 2030. But we wanted to have our citizens of Niagara-on-the-Lake look at their journey and to see what is possible and how long things might actually take. We do have some good news because we now have a Town of Niagara-on-the-Lake climate change coordinator. So we have invited her to the event, and we are going to introduce her at the event. We have invited Amnesty International and 50 by 30, the local chapters, to partner with us for the event. So Herb Zawatsky from 50 by 30 will speak about renewable energy and government grants, so making homes more efficient, which is something that we heard about tonight as well, retrofitting programs. One of our Seniors for Climate members, Francis Stoker, will be looking and delivering information on what other municipalities are doing in the region in terms of climate change. But the whole evening is also going to be about renewable energy fair. So we will have vendor tables, and with the current climate in terms of the tariffs, we are going to make sure that these are Canadian products. So we're inviting installers and vendors for insulation, solar panels, geothermal, other green power. We have Bullfrog Power here, heat pumps, windows, changing gas fireplaces to electric fireplaces, and also contractors and home builders. So that's the plan. So it's a renewable energy fair and looking also at Denmark.
And I'd love to be there, except I can't be in 76 locations at one time. Thank you very much, Lydia. So Margaret Ann McHugh unfortunately had an issue just before this meeting that prevented her from attending. However, I do have a little write-up here on what the plans are for Halifax. Although I don't know if I can say it with the same enthusiasm and energy that Margaret Ann would, I'm going to try. So someone told me to sit forward, and that gets you in the mood. So I'm sitting forward. Here goes. So on Earth Day in Halifax, every year, the Ecology Action Centre and the Council of Canadians do a large event called People's Parade for Life on Earth. We will be joining the People's Parade for Life on Earth. There are lots of large animal costumes from all over. It really is a parade, and it's amazing. People come to watch it. Everything about climate and the environment. So Seniors for Climate will be joining that, hoping to be a flock of birds in the parade. Our big pitch is to invite or tease them to join our October event. Our October event will be to ring bells that can still ring. It's an emergency, so ring the bells, sound the alarm. It's an emergency. We must have an information-rich event like last year and hope to have autonomous groups like Kairos to organize church bell ringing and other groups trying to get the Anglican Church to ring their bells too. In Nova Scotia, many of the churches are very poor and can't afford to maintain their bell towers. Lots of churches have bells but can't ring them because they aren't maintained well enough. Church bells ring, school bells buzz. But instead of getting the schools to buzz, we're going to try to link in youth to our event. We hope to identify brave souls to ring handbells and have an information-based but a little disruptive event to get attention. Lots of other groups like the idea of ringing bells. So that's what Margaret Ann has contributed for this. And judging from the hearts that are going up, people like that idea. So that's it for the events that are going on.
Well, thank you, David. And Catherine in the chat also asked if said that these are all good ideas that are being shared in the chat as well, and it would be great if they could be shared afterwards. So I'll leave that with the organizers as a takeaway. Nick, I'm going to hand it over to you again to introduce the trailer and take us through the next part of the program.
Thank you. You're probably wondering why the video's off. It's because I can't turn it back on. It's been turned off by accident, I gather. So I can't seem to get it back on. I think the host might be able to adjust that. I hope so. So what you're going to see now is a trailer, a short trailer. Okay, start my one. There we go. Okay, thanks, Don. So we're going to see a short trailer. It's about 3 minutes long. And what this trailer will do is give you a glimpse of the organizing that happened last year. Many of you, of course, were involved, some weren't. But what's happened is that the Nancy Nickel, who is a member of the Seniors for Climate, has put together video footage and still footage from across the country that was gathered that day and created an hour-long film called Later is Too Late. This trailer will give you a bit of an idea of what that film is like and what it's about. And we're going to talk to you in a few minutes about making that available and when it will be available for you to use. So I'll please run the trailer, Eric. Thanks.
We had such a big drought. Creeks dried up, springs dried up. And these fires started from lightning strikes. There were, I don't know, probably over 100 lightning strikes in a 20-minute period.
We have unprecedented amounts of fossil fuels emissions, carbon, in the atmosphere than there has been for over 100,000 years. And the consequences are that the planet is warming.
What we're doing here today, it's all about the planet. It's about making a healthier earth for everybody. And it's to get all grandparents across Canada. I think there's 10 million of us. We want you all in the same movement together.
We want to be the last generation hooked on fossil fuel and welcoming in the first generation of our children and grandchildren who will enjoy a prosperous and sustainable future.
We need a stringent cap on fossil fuel emissions. We need an end to fossil fuel subsidies. We need a freeze on new oil and gas projects.
If we don't do something now, we're going to lose everything. So we must stand up now in peace and work together for non-natives and natives to fight this demon.
We cannot develop any more fossil fuels. We can't burn the stuff they've got. We've got to eliminate greenhouse gas emissions. It's only at zero that we start to get this thing under control.
Every single person counts. Every single kilo, everything counts. So please, treat the climate crisis like the acute crisis it is and give us a future.
When will the Canadian government have the political will to put people over profit? To put my future before their economic gain?
We have to reduce and get off fossil fuels very, very quickly. And understand the fossil fuel industry has an agenda and that the survival of future generations is not a concern for them.
And we are here in the year 2024 at a time when the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres quite accurately says, we're on the highway to climate hell, foot on the accelerator.
We are unstoppable! Another world unstoppable! We are
Science is flashing a warning. Gotta heed the call. out them climate deniers for the good of all.
Okay, thank you. So that is a bit of a glimpse of last October 1st. It's an indication of what is possible. And I think, we have to really think about how we can contribute to building from here. So we're just getting underway, really start going into the high stage around organizing for the Earth Day events. And events can include everything from small things like kitchen table meetings through type educationals and broader groups, through demonstrations, through ringing bells, through other forms of activity, street theater, um, flash mobs, flash theater, all kinds of creativity that exists out there that we can mobilize and we can learn from. And also, we want the objective of building alliances, working with others. So, especially right now, given the situation we're facing as a country and the world is facing, in fact, alliances are going to be critical, and we have to look for ways to develop those and see the long term. Like this is, we got to organize quickly. We got to organize in big numbers. Everybody can contribute in some way. Everybody has something they can do, and the smallest thing is as important as the biggest thing, because together those things are what's going to make the kind of change that we can actually, that can be accomplished. So I invite people to put some of their ideas in the chat. I think there may be or may not be a minute or two for some comments. I'll leave that to Amber or Michael to decide, and look forward to the after chat as well.
Thank you, Nick. I just want to say the last generation hooked on fossil fuels. That's quite inspiring. So Michael, over to you and to Karen, if you want to take us through the last 10 minutes or so,
Sure.
if there are questions and whatnot.
Yep. And Karen, is it okay if I start with Anne? And Anne, since you're a panelist, I think you could raise this issue yourself just by unmuting. Thanks.
Hi. But I can't show myself, but that's okay. Let me try again. Nope, I can't show myself for some
Yeah,
reason.
Nick had the same problem earlier.
It's fine. You can sort of see me there. So anyway, I'm in our area is the location where Canadian Nuclear Labs has what's known within the nuclear industry as its center of excellence. They dominate the region economically and politically, socially. And as we know, there's a big push on for nuclear energy. To be more nuclear energy generation, both the so-called small and the larger builds and rebuilds. And it's not a real climate saver. And there's a lot of information left out and a lot of greenwashing. And then there's the absolutely endless problem of what to do with the nuclear waste because nobody knows. And it's the slogan, "Our Power," really concerns me when I looked it up because we are doing an Earth Day event with the Renfrew County Council to announce the fact that they're finally starting a climate action committee. Thanks be, it's taken us 2 years to get there, but we're doing one, and it's nice to tie in with that. And I imagine you guys are going to make a lot of resources that use that slogan, and I can just see the industry jumping on it, and I wonder how you're going to deal with it.
So I'll leave that to either Nick or David or Pat Wally to answer.
Nick, you're on mute.
So the concern is the slogan, "Our Power."
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. Well, our power is what we say it is, I think is the way we have to deal with that. And And it's our power as people, and it's a power in terms of renewable energy and renewable, the objective for Earth Day. Trouble is, you can pick various words and they can be used in various ways. But to me, we have to take possession, ownership of what that means.
I'm not talking about what it means to you or me. I'm talking about how the industry will jump on it if they see it. Earth Day, our power. And I'm used to how they jump on stuff. So
yeah.
Is there a way you guys can gear your resources and stuff so that they'll still work for people who, there's a lot of us who are really concerned about the nuclear energy thing and the nuclear waste thing in particular, and there's a lot of overlap. So is there a way that you guys can orient your stuff to make it clear what kind of power you're talking about and what kind of power you're not talking about? Anyways, I'm going to leave it at that.
Yeah, no, I think that's the only option we have is to talk about what power we're talking about. Absolutely.
In your resources.
Yeah, I presume. Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, they're not produced yet, so it gives us quite a bit of an opportunity to write this in the way that we need to write it.
Yay!
Well, Michael, Susanna Lloyd asks a question, which is more of a statement and is related to this, because she says, would building out the power grid with renewables be a wiser action than building pipelines? And she might include building as much as they are on nuclear as well to the east, even if that power can't be shipped overseas. So it's a statement as well as a question.
Mm-hmm.
Does anybody have any comments on that? Renewables are important for sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, I mean, I think that's what the issue is.
Yeah.
Is it building pipelines, or is it building an electrical grid across the country? And is that electrical grid renewable, or isn't it? Right? It seems to me we cannot have a future if we build our future on pipelines, and that's unfortunately what the discourse is right now. So that's the problem we face. We have to put that issue to the Canadian public, that it can't be a future based on oil pipelines. It has to be a future based on electrical grid with renewable energy. I think that's the challenge. It's going to be tough, but I think that's the challenge we face.
There's a suggestion from Josephine about basic income proposals and whether that can be part of the conversation. In relation to economic security, obviously, and the cost of living, to adapt to the new ways of life and realities. I don't know if anybody on the coordinating committee wants to address that.
It's a good question. I think in terms of what we've talked about, we haven't outlined specific proposals like that, but clearly any measure that deals with the social justice, with the redistribution of wealth, which is going to be necessary, is important, and that's one of them. That can be used. In the next period of time, people are going to lose their jobs. We're going to be facing a very uncertain economic future, and pulling together and redistributing some of that money that goes to oil companies towards building a renewable infrastructure and towards protecting people is what must happen. And it's going to be up to us, I think, to make that point, bring that point home.
Angela makes an excellent suggestion. She says there are quite a few resources being produced to show that renewables plus storage are cheaper than fossils. We need to put life cycle costs of nuclear on those graphs, and that includes the life cycle of dealing with the waste. And by the time you get all those facts out there, it just undermines the whole argument. It's not that I have a problem with nuclear power. I have a problem with nuclear waste. So, and all the other residual pieces of it. So, I think we really need to make it clear what the life cycle costs are. I think that's a good idea.
Totally. Yeah, I agree.
And thanks, Raleigh, for your comment.
There's a lot of great suggestions in the chat, which I think will be extremely helpful to the planning group who has to plan the messaging. And I think we also have to remember that the messaging is is centralized in a broad sense. But the expectation is that communities will use the general theme and the general approach in a way that makes sense for their communities. And so there will be different emphasis on the theme in different communities and can be rewritten and developed locally so that it makes sense for people in their community. So I think even though there's a central theme, the approach can be obviously very different, and the target audience will be very different on who you're trying to reach and who you're trying to get into the movement and get convinced to get active. So that would be a bit of a change. Karen, do you have any other specific questions that you found?
Just a last question. Jacques asks a question that we all think about. He says education's key to get the needed momentum, and new programs are needed, and consequently new resources. I'll end though with, he goes on, but he says he points to the importance of education and how do we bring Canadians to acknowledge that we do maybe need to consume less, including long distance vacations, etc. In other words, how do we become a little less materialistic? So also a statement, not so much a question too.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, there's quite a few really encouraging suggestions about what people might do. So what we're going to do after this meeting today, after the webinar today, is that we're going to assemble these in some kind of logical fashion so that people will be able to take some of the ideas that are being presented in the chat or in the chat here and supply those to everyone. So the chat's pretty chaotic, of course, but we're going to try to organize that in some fashion and get it back out to people along with the recording of this meeting and whatever slides that have been presented. We'll also attach those. So everybody who responded that they were going to come to this meeting will get those materials. And I think it was about 700 people. I'm just scrolling through the chat here. We've got a couple more minutes to see if there's any other specific questions about the 26th. Most of these are just great ideas and resources. People are putting a lot of resources into the chat as well, so it's great. There is maybe one question. I don't know whether the organizing committee has dealt with the question of the east-west pipeline that keeps coming up versus the east-west power grid, and whether there's any conversation about that being a central focus, because it is a national, dragging a pipeline across the country, it affects every single province.
Yeah, so yes, we have talked about it. Not only is it a better option, but oil pipelines are going to take a long time to build. They're massive investments, and they just take us in the wrong direction. So yeah, I think that's the way to pose the option. We have talked a bit about that, and I think that's going to be pretty key, like point in the messaging. How we do that, because electrical grid across the country will create more jobs than building pipelines. It'll have results sooner and more effectively than building pipelines, aside from the fact that building pipelines is going totally in the wrong direction. It means more emissions. And we just don't have that option right now. It's too late to be adding more emissions in the world we're in. So that's why the electrical grid option is the image is completely opposite. You share sort of the concept, but it's two different ways of sharing that concept of a cross-country system of distributing energy.
Great. So I think maybe what we'll do is we could just move on. Eric, if we have slides around our website address and all of this sort of stuff. So we'll just connect you here to how you can find out more information or how you can reach us and keep in touch. Certainly, there's our website. It's seniorsforclimate.org. It'll have the map of the actions. It'll have resources that organizers can use and download for their events. Signing up to our mailing list, if you haven't already, certainly will keep you in the loop And if you have any questions, you just have to email admin@seniorsforclimate.org, and someone will get back to you. It's a monitor. That's the address that we monitor. And there is social media as well, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. We've disconnected from X, and I think we're considering Blue Sky as an alternative to X. So that's how you can stay involved and get other people involved. Get people to sign up on seniorsforclimate.org. We can increase the, I don't know, 3,200 folks we have on our mailing list. Our objective is to try to get that to 10,000. So if if you're able, if you can sort of get your friends and your relatives and colleagues to consider signing up for Seniors for Climate on seniorsforclimate.org. That will help us get in touch with more people and help amplify the events both in April and in the fall. Let's see. I think yeah, there's always donations, right? If you can donate to Seniors for Climate. It's a crowdfunding link with the Small Change Fund. And when you donate to Small Change Fund, that is a tax receivable, a tax credit that you get when you provide funds through the Small Change Fund. So that is helpful for some people. And so I think we'll just sort of wrap this up by thanking everybody, both our sponsors, our events, certainly Amber taking her time out from her reclimate work to monitor this, and Mili and Marc. Without everybody behind the scenes doing all this work, we wouldn't be able to provide all of this. There's a lot of work going on all over the place. So now